Hello and welcome to this fourth video in the coding music series, Loop Within a Loop. We are going to look at a composition by Vidwan Patri Satish in Aditalam, which is an 8-beat cycle. Unlike typical chord-wise or compositions, this one connects the two parts of the chord-wise, the Purvanga and Uttaranga, in a very interesting way. Let's first listen to it. The composition starts like this: Takadinatam, Takitatam, Kitatam. Just three components. Takadinatam, which is a pattern of length 7, which then reduces to Takitatam 6, Kitatam 5. And then Tatikitatum, Tatikitatum, Tatikitatum. That's part 2, which is just pattern of 5 repeated thrice with a gap of 1. Just to show how the two parts of the composition are linked together, the first descent in groups of 1, 7, 6, 5, and correspondingly you have 3 Tatikitatum, so 3 patterns of 5, Tatikitatum, Tatikitatum, Tatikitatum. The second, you descend in groups of 2, 7, 6, 6, 5, 5, 4, and correspondingly you have 2 Tatikitatums, Tatikitatum, 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 Tatikitatum. And in the third, you descend in groups of 3, 7, 6, 5, 6, 5, 4, 5, 4, 3, and you have Tatikitatum, 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 Tatikitatum. 3 5s. So the composition has two parts, part 1 and part 2. We'll call them X and Y. Part 1 starts with a pattern of length 7. So that's X equal to 7 here. And part 2 is a fixed pattern of 5. So we encode it as F, so Y equal to F. The details of how we encode sounds in this Python environment are in an earlier video. Link is in the description. But to summarize, we have to define what sounds correspond to each pattern. And so we start with the 7 pattern, which is Takadinatam, and the sound corresponding to X is encoded as WXXOW dash dash. These are the two, there's a gap of 2. So Takadinatam, Takadinatam, gap, gap. So that's what this is. Now once we have the pattern of 7, you can get the patterns for 6, 5, 4, 3 simply by decreasing or removing the first letter from that pattern. So Takadinatam, now you remove the Ta, Kadinatam, Dinatam, Tatam, Tam, and so on. So that's what this loop here does. and the fixed pattern is just tati kita tom. And this is a gap. It's encoded as dash. The sound is encoded as a dash, and we also use a dash to represent it. Now this here is the crux of the composition. So loop within a loop. So the outer loop is obviously 3. So we have 3 cycles there. So 1, 2 and 3. So part 1 is the decreasing pattern we looked at. So it's a decreasing pattern where x, which is 7, is reduced both by the iteration we are in, the loop iteration we are in, and inner loop iteration we are in. So initially you start with 7 and then 6 and 5, and you have 7, 6. Now you're in the second iteration of the loop, so you start with 6. The third you start with 5, and so on. So that's this one here. Part 2 is fairly obvious. You just k repeats. So in the first loop you have a pattern of 5, tati kita tom, tati kita tom, tati kita tom 3 times. Then you have tati kita tom, tati kita tom, tati kita tom, tati kita tom twice, and the third time you have tati kita tom, tati kita tom, tati kita tom thrice. So you can see how neatly k links together the outer loop and the inner loop. Now, having done this, you can see the composition represented in numeric form here. So I'll just read out the first part. Takadinatam, takitatam, kitatam, tatikitatom, tatikitatom, tatikitatom. Obviously there is a gap between these, which we'll add when we create the sounds. Takadinatam, takitatam, takitatam, kitatam, tatam, tatam, tatikitatum, 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 tatikitatum. Takadinatam, takitatam, kitatam, takitatam, kitatam, tam, kitatam, tatam, tam, tatikitatum, 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 tam. So that's the whole korvai represented in numbers. Now we'll just map them to the sounds which we have already defined. Here we have the entire composition or korvai represented as one string. You can just read it from here to the end. Takadinatam, takitatam, kitatam, tatikitatum, 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 takadinatam, takitatam, takitatam, kitatam, tatam, tatam, tatikitatum, 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 takadinatam, takitatam, kitatam, takitatam, kitatam, tatam, kitatam, tatam, tam, tatikitatum, 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 tam. Tatikitatum, 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 taadinatam, takitatam, kitatam, takitatam, kitatam, tatam, kitatam, tatam, tam, tatikitatum, 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 tam. So you can change the clock speed, speed it up, and so on. You can also change the sounds corresponding to each of the patterns. You can set tabla patterns or mridangam patterns or some other drum patterns and play with the korvai.